Welcome back to the channel. Today we got something a lot more deep today. This is Native American slave owners' forgotten history. Now, this is something I actually don't know too much about, so I'm definitely excited to dive in and learn something new. With that being said, we're smoking all my dragons, divine, righteous, almighty, greats, overachieving, never slacking. Hope you guys are conquering all your goals as we wrap up this year of the dragon soon. But with that being said, original link in the description. Here we go.
Slavery is as old as civilization. Every culture and society practiced it, and were also victims of it. The North American Indians were no different. Various tribes enslaved other tribes, usually through raids and after battles, capturing their quarry. This included men, women, and children. Native Americans also captured whites and also had black slaves from the colonial period until the end of the Civil War. How common was Native American enslavement? Were there any major differences between Indian slave owners and other ethnic slave owners?
So those are the stories you really don't hear much about.
Which tribes were the most notorious for enslaving others? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear things from all different perspectives, so you can formulate your own opinion on things. Some people are just think just one way.
Many tribes practiced slavery. However, their primary practice was not based upon race, but more on their differences in tribal customs and the conflict between tribes over territory and resources. Many times, slaves were taken to replace those who had been killed, especially as laborers. Children who were orphaned were usually brought up within the tribe as their own, without distinction. This was also true of white captives, such as the famous story of Comanche chief Quanah Parker's mother. She was captured as a young girl and brought up as Comanche, and when forcibly returned to white society, she could not assimilate. But many Indian cultures captured or accepted runaway black slaves, and not all tribes treated them the same way.
I respect that he said that, because if he was pushing a certain narrative, it would have just been making the natives look completely horrible. And there's a lot of people out there who, once again, they just pushing narratives, whether that's making people look horrible, or whether that's making people just victimizing. It's a lot of narratives out there to keep the people from seeing the truth and keep the people divided. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of hatred in their hearts, so be mindful of that.
The Iroquois nation of New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, which was actually comprised of the 5 original Iroquois nations, which comprised the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. It was not uncommon, and chronicled by the French, that the Iroquois tribes were rather ruthless in the raids to capture slaves, black or white, and the captives often underwent very long, painful, and humiliating torture sessions to break their spirits. But in the colonies, in the mid-1760s, New York requested, as a requirement of treaties with the Huron and Delaware tribes, that they had to return escaped slaves, yet the record does not reflect that any were in fact returned. In fact, those that we call the 5 civilized tribes in the southeast United States, which were actually given that name due to their adoption of many European cultural values, to include centralized forms of representative government, conversion to Christianity, education and literacy, intermarriage with whites, and, of course, their participation in the ownership of black slaves. Much of this cultural assimilation was due to the belief by the tribes that if they acquiesced and adopted European methods, then they would not be persecuted themselves and pushed off their lands. These Native American groups primarily included the nations in the southeast, such as the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, Choctaw Creek, and Seminole tribes. Ironically, only the Chickasaw and Choctaw failed to free all of the people they held in captivity until 1866, after the Civil War, when the federal government had to step in. By the 18th century, many Native Americans owned black slaves, and some tribes, such as the Catawba and Cherokee, were notorious for their dislike of blacks. Hence, their slaves were not normally assimilated, but worked like common laborers under often harsh conditions.
We got to keep in mind too that it's different tribes that make up. I would say Cherokee would be more so almost like a federation. A lot of these tribes, like it's different tribes that make up, it's like an umbrella, under something that they all kind of call. Okay, that's a Cherokee all over there, but it's like they all got their own different customs and traditions based on what the area, based on the area that they're in. But man, oh man, history is crazy.
The Cherokee were also famous for owning the largest number of black slaves purchased from white slave traders in the colonial period. It is recorded.
Hold up, I gotta run that back.
In harsh conditions. The Cherokee were also famous for owning the largest number of black slaves purchased from white slave traders in the.
See, I got Cherokee in my blood and Blackfoot, so it's like I gotta run certain things back.
Colonial period. It is recorded that in 1809, the Cherokee owned nearly 600 black slaves. Another unique fact was that the Cherokee Constitution did not recognize the children of black women as members of the nation.
It's crazy because I heard somebody saying too, I seen a viral TikTok video with some dude saying, he was like, my people always been here, we didn't come from Africa. I'm such and such. I think, did he say Cherokee? It was one of them tribes in the South. He said, we owned slaves. We wasn't slaves. But I actually felt disrespected by that video. I ain't gonna lie, because it's like, it was kind of said more so with as a badge of honor. And I didn't respect that, because it's like, people spend so much time, I'm Nigerian too. My mother, she come directly from Igbo land. So it's like, you hear so many people say, "Oh, Africans sold Africans," right? Which so-called Africa in general, is just a massive, massive continent. So there was so many that went against that, but you don't hear those stories like that. But my point is, for the ones that do, when I seen that video and people like that who, like it's a badge of honor, it honestly kind of made me sick, because it was like, it just reflected self-hate to me. Like, how can you brag about something like that? That's insane. Oh, mommy.
The Cherokee did not recognize formal marriages between their people and the black slaves in the Cherokee Act of Union in 1839, and this was revised in 1855. Those slaves who returned after the Civil War were denied Cherokee citizenship, although Cherokee Chief Lewis Downing tried to legally correct this, but he was overruled by the National Council, and the Cherokee National Legislature called upon the federal government to remove what they called the intruders. However, it should be noted that there was a sect within the Cherokee called the Ketowa Society, which was a secret abolitionist organization that ran its own underground railroad and protected runaway slaves. The Chickasaw produced cotton, corn, tobacco, livestock, and poultry for self-consumption, but also to sell on the open market to white Americans. Their use of black slave labor assisted in these projects, being that they were an agrarian-based economy. The Chickasaw also gave greater value to white mixed members over those who were black mixed, and in their culture, white mixed Chickasaw often became chiefs, but that was not part of the program for the black Chickasaw. In an effort to stop race mixing, Chickasaws were publicly punished for having relationships with blacks. They were subjected to fines, whippings, and often expulsion from the nation. The Creek Nation had many interactions with blacks, and some took runaway slaves into their protection, although they still considered them inferior due to the type of field work that the men had to do on the plantations. Many blacks would become Creek slaves, or in some cases, the Creeks would sell the runaways back to their white owners. During the 18th century, after the American Revolution, the whites placed bounties on runaways. In most cases, the Creeks refused to comply with the white demands for their return. During this period, few Creeks owned black slaves, but by the 1850s this changed, and after the Great Relocation West, where it is estimated that 10% of the Creek Nation were black slaves. The Choctaw in Georgia, in their 1840 Constitution, did not allow freed blacks or runaways to settle within Choctaw territory, meaning that they were not allowed to own land. But white men could and often did get permission in writing from the tribal chief or United States agent in charge to live within the Choctaw Nation. Blacks or their offspring were not allowed to become citizens of the nation or hold office, but this was not true of Choctaw white men married to Choctaw women, and their children were considered members who could then become citizens. The Choctaw also began to have an abrasive relationship with the Christian missionaries who arrived and built churches and schools, and this was tolerated until the missionaries began preaching that slavery in its entirety was antithetical to Christian values. Then the missionaries were politely told to leave. The Choctaw, like the majority of white slave owners, did not want their slaves literate. Most of the Indian slave owners had many of the chiefs of the various tribes who were themselves mixed race, living in both the world of the Indian and the white man. Some of these slave owner chiefs were also mixed Indian and black, such as the father of Medal of Honor recipient Pompey Factor, who was himself a black Seminole.
You can see where it get very confusing as far as history, because we got what we're taught, which is the history right here. Even though a lot of people still don't know about this or weren't taught this, but then you had people that was before the native, what we call the Native Americans that was in America, which that there's, listen, it's people with ghost DNA, but I'm gonna leave that there. I'll use, since we mentioned Cherokee, since Cherokee's mentioned a lot. When you look at tribes in the northeastern, woodlands, it said that they came from Asia, right? Was it Southeast Asia? Now, when you look at that geneticist, Jen something, you can look him up on YouTube. He did an experiment where he took DNA from thousands of tribes from Southeast Asia, and because he wanted to prove that like Asians have always just been Asian. That came back that they was all African, right? Even when you look at the San tribe in South Africa, you'll see the genetics of like it looks like in what you'd see as an Asian man today. So my thing is, if 48,000 years ago in the Northeast you had these Southeast Asians that traveled to Americas, I'm pretty sure they wasn't light skinned. It's like so less. So many people that was, and it was probably already people there before. You know what I'm saying, when they got there. So it's so much lineages that trace back further than what we're taught, and there's so much history and so much discoveries that we'll probably won't know about for a long time. I do believe that things are changing and a lot of truth is coming out, but there is a lot of stuff hidden too, which also keeps. It's like we're birds. We're birds born in a cage that don't know they can fly. We don't know about. We don't know. Like a lot of people don't even know Vikings were in America, right? Prior to Columbus. So I just feel like there's a long, rich history, not just just with a lot of people that isn't told, right? We even when we are told Vikings came, like we don't know if there was Vikings that came 100 years before that, or I feel like we're very, very limited in what we're taught on purpose.
The Seminoles were generally the most relaxed in their relations with the black slaves, and they generally welcomed them into their tribes, and the children of the mixed-race children were usually treated no differently than the other members, with Pompey Factor's father being a prime example, but this was not universal. Seminoles still raided plantations and took both black and white slaves, and many black slaves ran away to join the Seminoles, believing that they would have a better life. This was true until the end of the First Seminole War, after which the practice became too risky and the black runaways were often returned to avoid retribution from their white owners. General Thomas Jessup believed.
See, at that point, that's when I would have to say, there really needs to be a real conversation, because there's people who still, they claim Seminole to this day, literally, and still, they still go by those traditions. So I would love to see like a roundtable talk with different people, Seminoles, Cherokee, real representatives of those cultures, and really see everybody else's opinion, right? Those that could really hold themselves with a lot of maturity, and just without getting too, without it becoming a debate, let's say, without it becoming a debate. I was gonna say argument, but my pronunciation ain't going there right now. But without it being so much of a debate, like, or a heated, heavy debate, but just really putting out the facts, right? As a matter of fact, yeah, it could be a debate, but I'm just saying something that don't get too crazy, just so we can sit, because I like to hear other people's opinions, right? I like to hear the other side.
That if there was a second Seminole War, the entire southern region could explode into open rebellion, with black slaves revolting against their owners in alliance with the Seminole and possibly other tribes. During the conclusion of that Second Seminole War, these tribes took their black slaves with them along the way to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma when they were removed from the American Southeast by the U.S. government. Pompey Factor's family removed west from Florida, and after the government forced relocation of the tribes, they ended up in Arkansas. Many were relocated in Arkansas. And some, like Factor's family, even went to Texas. Many of these Indians still owned their slaves, even as they were themselves being pushed onto reservations. The Seminoles were then thrown onto Creek lands, who were already there, and as the Creek practiced chattel slavery, some Seminole thought that was a great idea, while the majority did not. Regardless, the Creek and other tribes raided Seminole properties to steal their slaves. It was these actions that saw Factor's family and others escape into Mexico, where slavery was illegal. It was this push westward that carried chattel slavery into the frontier, setting the stage for future political conflict that would become problematic with the approaching Civil War pitting slave states against non-slave states.
Here's how the average man's life would change if he used pie for 5 days straight. Day 1.
However, it has been documented that in many cases, blacks held as slaves by Indians fared much better and lived a better life than blacks owned by the majority of white masters. But then there were the tribes that did not own slaves of any kind, let alone blacks, who gave runaways sanctuary and made them part of their tribes. Some whites disapproved of the lenient treatment given to the blacks by their Indian benefactors and owners. The great Black Orator Frederick Douglass stated in 1850, "The slave finds more of the milk of human kindness in the bosom of the savage Indian than in the heart of his Christian master." One government official, a white Indian agent named Douglas Cooper, was somewhat disturbed by the relaxed, lenient, and almost equal treatment of blacks held by some Indian tribes, that he suggested to these tribes that they should invite white men in to teach them the proper method of handling the Negroes. It is known that some Native American women bought male slaves, then freed them, married them, and then their children were born free according to the laws in the 18th century. As one may imagine, this practice was somewhat frowned upon by many in the slaveholding states later. The practice of
It's usually women doing something righteous.
Native American slavery was as diverse as it was common among their contemporaries.
Not to say there wasn't no wicked ones in history, but they tend to, their emotions tend to, be them open up them hearts just a little more than men, just a little more.
Some tribes had laws and councils that adjudicated the status of black slaves and even white slaves. The treatment of black slaves among their Native American owners was just as diverse when compared to whites, depending upon the tribe in question But it is irrefutable that Native Americans, while not in their majority, were deeply involved in the black slave trade in varying degrees. Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.
Crazy, crazy, crazy history in America, man. But honestly, it makes me proud. And I know some people are probably like, "What? Why is it?" It makes me proud because it's like, knowing my ancestry, on my maternal side, them being them Ebos, and them the Ebo tribe was known for being very rebellious. Go look at Ebo land, and my ancestors was the ones rebelling on them ships, burning them ships down. When you hear about the Nat Turner rebellion, Nat Turner was said to be Ebo. When you hear the Haitian Revolution, you got Captain the Ebo. So, my ancestry was known for, rebelling and tearing it up. And then when you had and then on my paternal side, which I said, like I said, I got Cherokee Blackfoot. It's like just me to be the person I am today. I know I make my ancestors proud throughout all that, the trauma they may have faced, or even the trauma they may have, given, just the person I've become, right? If I had an Ebenezer Scrooge in my bloodline, um, wherever that person's at right now, they're looking at me from the spirit realm, and they're learning and they're growing because I'm teaching them through being a better person. So that's what I mean by it makes me proud. Is either way, I was people like that's like me. I was the result of all that, and I'm not a victim, and I'm not a evil person either. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and that's why it makes me proud. That's why it makes me proud because out of all that, I came out of that. And if you're a solid person, same to you. If same to you. If you're a solid person, and when I say solid person, somebody who doesn't spread hatred, somebody who doesn't just push narratives to try to have a superiority complex or whatever, just people who are solid, just what we would call good people, right? For lack of a better word, just good people, right? If you're just an everyday solid person, then it all matters, right? Like you matter, like you were the result of all that trauma, because everybody got trauma in their DNA. I don't care what you look like, it's a fact. If you're human, you got trauma in your DNA, you know. So, with that being said, that was a great a great little documentary that was put together about the forgotten history, and it definitely is something to learn from, and hopefully this is being shown in schools. But with that being said, original link in the description. If you enjoyed this, definitely don't hesitate to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell, and continue to be a great person, no matter how people look, no matter their background. uh, just continue to try not to judge people too hard, especially the kids. It's a lot of people that judge like the babies, the kids, like they undeveloped, right? Sometimes a kind act can really completely change somebody's life. That's a fact. But with that being said, much love.